The night was calm, the kind where the world seems to pause for just a little while. The streets of Chicago were quiet, with only the occasional hum of a passing car breaking the stillness. Marcus Davis sat behind the wheel of his Uber, scrolling through his phone as he waited for his next ride request. At 37 years old, Marcus had seen his fair share of ups and downs in life. He wasn't rich, nor did he have grand dreams of fame or fortune. All he wanted was to provide for his two kids, Ava and Liam, who meant everything to him. Marcus had been driving for Uber for 6 years now. Before that, he worked at a factory. But when machines replaced human workers, he found himself out of a job. It wasn't easy starting over, especially as a single father, but Marcus didn't complain. He took pride in working hard no matter how tough things got. That night, like every other night, he was focused on earning enough to pay the bills and keep a roof over his family's head. As he drove down a quiet residential street, something unusual caught his eye. A group of teenagers stood near an alleyway, their voices rising anxiously. One of them pointed toward the shadows, where a figure stumbled into view. It was a man, unsteady on his feet, clutching what looked like a gun. Marcus slowed his car, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. The man shouted something incomprehensible, waving the weapon wildly. Then Marcus saw it. A young boy frozen on the sidewalk, staring wide-eyed at the armed man. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus realized the danger the child was in. Without thinking, he made a decision that would change everything. Marcus slammed his car into park and jumped out, shouting, "Hey, over here!" His voice cut through the tension like a knife. The armed man turned sharply, startled by the sudden interruption. For a brief moment, everyone froze. Marcus, the gunman, the teenagers, and the terrified boy. Then came the gunshot. The sound was loud and sharp, piercing the quiet night like a thunderclap. Marcus felt a searing pain rip through his shoulder as the bullet hit him, but instead of collapsing, he pushed forward, fueled by adrenaline and sheer determination. Ignoring the pain, he lunged at the gunman, tackling him to the ground with all the strength he could muster. Chaos erupted around them. The teenagers screamed, some running for safety while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. The little boy, no older than 8, stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down his face. Marcus barely registered any of this. His mind was laser-focused on one thing, making sure the boy was safe. By the time police arrived, sirens blaring in the distance, Marcus was sitting on the curb, blood soaking through his shirt. Paramedics rushed to his side trying to stabilize him as they loaded him into an ambulance. Despite the pain, Marcus kept asking about the boy. "Is he okay? Did he get hurt?" He repeated over and over, his voice weak but insistent. Word of the incident spread quickly. Within hours, videos of Marcus's heroic act flooded social media. Strangers shared posts praising his bravery, calling him a real-life superhero. Some even compared him to characters from action movies, though Marcus would later laugh at the idea. To him, it wasn't about being a hero. It was simply about doing what needed to be done. For Marcus, the events of that night were both surreal and terrifying. He hadn't planned to put himself in harm's way. He hadn't thought about the consequences of his actions. All he knew was that a child's life was in danger, and someone had to step up. As he lay in the back of the ambulance, clutching his injured shoulder, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if he'd made the right choice. Would his own kids forgive him if something happened to him? Would they understand why their dad risked his life for a stranger? Despite his doubts, Marcus couldn't deny the sense of relief washing over him. The boy was safe. That was all that mattered. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Marcus closed his eyes, letting exhaustion take over. Little did he know, his story was only beginning. In the days that followed, Marcus's act of bravery captured the nation's attention. News outlets covered the story extensively, highlighting the selflessness of a man who put his own life on the line to save a child. People from all walks of life reached out to express their admiration, sharing stories of how Marcus's courage inspired them to be better versions of themselves. But for Marcus, the real challenge lay ahead. Recovery wouldn't be easy, and the emotional scars ran deeper than anyone could see. Yet even in the midst of uncertainty, one thing was clear. Marcus Davis had become a symbol of hope in a world often overshadowed by fear and despair. As the city of Chicago woke up to another day, the memory of that chaotic night lingered in the air. For the boy whose life was saved, for the witnesses who watched in awe, and for Marcus himself, nothing would ever be the same again. What started as a quiet evening had turned into a defining moment, one that would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. The gunshot echoed through the night, sharp and deafening. It was a sound that would haunt everyone who heard it for years to come. Marcus Davis fell backward, clutching his shoulder as blood began to seep through his fingers. Pain shot through his body like lightning, but he didn't stop. Adrenaline surged through his veins, dulling the agony just enough for him to keep moving. His mind was a blur of instinct and determination. He knew what he had to do. The armed man, startled by Marcus's sudden appearance, hesitated for a split second. In that brief moment of confusion, Marcus lunged forward with every ounce of strength he could muster. He tackled the gunman to the ground, their bodies crashing onto the cold pavement with a thud. The gun skittered out of the man's hand, sliding across the asphalt and out of reach. For a few seconds there was silence. Everyone stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The teenagers who had been watching from a distance were the first to react. Some screamed and ran while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. One of them shouted, "Call the police!" Another yelled, "Is he okay?" But no one dared to step closer. Marcus groaned in pain, his vision starting to blur. He could feel the warm stickiness of blood soaking through his shirt, but he forced himself to stay focused. Keeping his weight pressed down on the gunman, he shouted hoarsely, "Stay down, don't move." His voice trembled, but it carried authority. The man beneath him struggled briefly, then went limp, seemingly giving up. Meanwhile, the little boy, the reason Marcus had risked everything, remained frozen on the sidewalk. Tears streamed down his face as he stared at the scene unfolding before him. He clutched a small backpack tightly to his chest, his tiny frame shaking uncontrollably. For a moment, Marcus locked eyes with the boy, offering a weak smile despite the pain coursing through his body. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if the boy could hear him over the chaos. Within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the air. Police cars screeched to a halt near the scene, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the street. Officers spilled out of the vehicles, shouting commands as they assessed the situation. Two of them rushed toward Marcus and the gunman, quickly restraining the latter with handcuffs. Another officer knelt beside Marcus, speaking calmly but urgently. "Sir, can you hear me?" "Stay with us," the officer said, placing a firm hand on Marcus's uninjured shoulder. Paramedics arrived moments later, carrying medical kits and stretchers. They worked swiftly, applying pressure to the wound and stabilizing Marcus before loading him into an ambulance. Despite the flurry of activity around him, Marcus kept asking about the boy. "Is he okay? Did he get hurt?" He repeated over and over, his voice growing weaker with each word. The paramedics assured him that the boy was fine, but Marcus wouldn't relax until he saw it with his own eyes. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, he caught sight of the child standing nearby, still clutching his backpack. The boy looked pale and shaken, but otherwise unharmed. Relief washed over Marcus, even as waves of dizziness threatened to pull him under. He managed a faint nod, mouthing the words, "Good." By the time the ambulance sped away, news of the incident had already begun to spread. Witnesses uploaded videos to social media, capturing glimpses of Marcus's heroic act. The footage showed the chaos of the moment, the gunshot, the struggle, the terrified faces of bystanders, but also the raw courage of a man who refused to back down. Comments poured in almost instantly, praising Marcus's bravery and calling him a hero. "He took a bullet to save a kid," one commenter wrote. "This guy deserves a medal." "Real-life superheroes exist," another added. "Thank you, Marcus Davis." As the story gained traction, people across the country tuned in to learn more. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting interviews with witnesses and sharing updates on Marcus's condition. Journalists scrambled to piece together details about the Uber driver who had risked his life for a stranger. Who was this man? What drove him to make such a selfless choice? At the hospital, Marcus lay in a bed in the emergency room, hooked up to machines monitoring his vitals. Doctors worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the bullet, which had lodged itself deep in his shoulder. Surgery lasted several hours, leaving Marcus physically drained but alive. When he finally regained consciousness, he found himself surrounded by nurses and doctors, all marveling at his resilience. "You're incredibly lucky," one of the nurses told him gently. "Another inch or two and that bullet could have done far more damage." Lucky wasn't exactly how Marcus felt. Every movement brought fresh waves of pain, reminding him of the price he'd paid for his actions. Yet, as he drifted in and out of sleep, snippets of conversations reached his ears. Visitors came and went, including the parents of the boy he had saved. They thanked him profusely, tears streaming down their faces as they expressed gratitude for giving them more time with their son. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you," the boy's mother said, her voice trembling. "You saved our family." Marcus shook his head weakly, unable to muster the energy to speak. Inside, however, he felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he was proud of what he had done. Saving that child gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the worry gnawing at the edges of his mind. What if something had gone wrong? What if he hadn't been fast enough? And most importantly, how would his own children react when they learned what had happened? As the days passed, Marcus's recovery became a national talking point. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, offering prayers and well wishes. Someone even set up a GoFundMe page to help cover his medical expenses and support his family during his recovery. Donations poured in faster than anyone expected, surpassing the initial goal within hours. Celebrities tweeted about his bravery, and local businesses offered free meals and services to show their appreciation. Despite the outpouring of love and admiration, Marcus remained humble. When reporters visited him in the hospital, eager to document his story, he shrugged off the idea of being a hero. "I'm not special," he told them. Anyone else would have done the same thing. But deep down, Marcus knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone would have stepped into harm's way like he did. Most people would have hesitated, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. Marcus hadn't thought twice. He acted, purely on instinct, driven by a desire to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. As he lay in his hospital bed staring at the ceiling, Marcus reflected on the events that had led him to this moment. Life hadn't always been kind to him. He'd faced hardships, disappointments, and setbacks that could have broken a lesser person. Yet here he was, still standing, or rather lying down, and somehow managing to inspire millions of strangers. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Recovery would take time, and the emotional scars might never fully heal. But Marcus had already proven one thing. Even in the darkest moments, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary acts of courage. And sometimes those acts ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could have imagined. For now, Marcus focused on healing. He thought about his kids, Ava and Liam, and the future he hoped to build for them. He thought about the little boy he had saved and the grateful parents who promised to never forget his sacrifice. And he thought about the countless strangers who had rallied behind him, proving that humanity still had plenty of good left in it. As sleep finally claimed him, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he had made the right choice. Recovery was never easy, especially for someone like Marcus Davis. The bullet had torn through his shoulder, leaving behind a wound that would take weeks to heal and months to fully recover from. Doctors warned him early on that he might never regain full mobility in his left arm. Physical therapy sessions were grueling, filled with exercises designed to rebuild strength and flexibility. Each movement sent sharp jolts of pain coursing through his body, but Marcus gritted his teeth and pushed through it all. "I've been through worse," he often told himself during the toughest moments, and in many ways, he had. losing his job at the factory, raising 2 kids as a single father and struggling to make ends meet. Life had thrown its share of challenges at Marcus. But this time felt different. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, despite the odds. Every step forward in his recovery reminded him of why he had taken that bullet in the first place: to give someone else a chance at life. While Marcus focused on healing, the world outside continued to celebrate his bravery. Social media buzzed, with posts praising his selflessness. Videos of the incident had gone viral, racking up millions of views across platforms. Strangers shared heartfelt messages, calling him a real-life hero. Even celebrities chimed in, using their massive followings to amplify his story. One famous actor tweeted, "This is what true courage looks like. Thank you, Marcus Davis." The attention overwhelmed Marcus at first. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Growing up, he had always been an ordinary guy, quiet, hard-working, and content to stay out of the limelight. But now people recognized him everywhere he went. At the grocery store, strangers stopped him to shake his hand or thank him. On the street, cars honked as drivers rolled down their windows to shout words of encouragement. It was surreal, almost, like living in someone else's life. Despite the praise, Marcus remained grounded. In interviews, he consistently downplayed his actions, saying things like, "I'm no hero. I just did what anyone else would have done." But deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone would have stepped into harm's way like he did. Most people would have hesitated, thinking about the risks involved. Marcus hadn't thought twice. For him, it was simple. A child's life was worth more than his own safety. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to see how his act of bravery had touched lives far beyond the immediate moment. Schools started inviting him to speak to students about courage and making good choices under pressure. Community leaders praised him as a symbol of hope in a world often divided by fear and mistrust. Even businesses offered free services to show their support, from complimentary meals at local restaurants to discounted gym memberships to help him regain his strength. One of the most unexpected outcomes of his newfound fame was the financial relief it brought to his family. The GoFundMe page set up by one of the witnesses surpassed its goal within days, raising over $200,000. People from all over the country donated, some giving small amounts while others contributed thousands. A wealthy entrepreneur even pledged to cover Marcus's medical bills entirely, ensuring he wouldn't have to worry about expenses during his recovery. For Marcus, the generosity of strangers was both humbling and inspiring. "It's not just about me," he said in an interview. "This is proof that there are still good people out there who care about each other. That gives me hope." But amidst all the positivity, Marcus couldn't ignore the emotional toll his experience had taken. Nights were the hardest. Lying awake, in bed, he replayed the events of that chaotic night over and over in his mind. What if the bullet had hit him somewhere else? What if he hadn't acted quickly enough? These questions haunted him, keeping sleep at bay. Sometimes he woke up in a cold sweat, his heart racing as if the gunshot had just echoed through the air again. To cope, Marcus leaned on his support system, his kids, Ava and Liam, and close friends who visited him regularly. His children, though young, understood the gravity of what their dad had done. They were proud of him even if they didn't fully grasp the details of the incident. "Daddy's a superhero," Ava declared one evening, wrapping her arms around him tightly. Hearing those words made Marcus smile, even as tears welled up in his eyes. The boy he saved, Ethan, also played a significant role in Marcus's healing process. Ethan's parents brought him to visit Marcus several times during his recovery. At first, the boy was shy, unsure of what to say to the man who had risked his life for him. But as the visits continued, a bond formed between them. Ethan began, bringing small gifts, a drawing he'd made, a toy car he thought Marcus might like. During one visit, he handed Marcus a card decorated with colorful stickers and scribbled letters. Inside it read, "Thank you for saving me. You're my hero." Holding the card in his hands, Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He realized then that his sacrifice had been worth every ounce of pain. Saving Ethan wasn't just about protecting one child, it was about giving a family their future back. Seeing the gratitude in Ethan's eyes and hearing his laughter reminded Marcus of the ripple effect kindness could create. One act of bravery could inspire countless others to pay it forward. As Marcus grew stronger physically, he also found new purpose emotionally. He decided to use his platform to spread a message of hope and resilience. With the help of mentors and supporters, he began crafting speeches aimed at motivating people to overcome adversity and embrace compassion. His presentations resonated deeply, drawing standing ovations wherever he went. In one particularly memorable talk, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium and shared his philosophy. Life throws challenges at us every day. Some are big, some are small, but we all have the power to rise above them. Courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing the right thing even when you're scared. If we can do that, we can change the world, one small act at a time. His words struck a chord with audiences, many of whom approached him afterward to share their own stories of struggle and triumph. Teachers told him how his speech inspired their students to stand up against bullying. Parents thanked him for reminding them to cherish their loved ones. Veterans shook his hand, saying his resilience gave them hope for their own recoveries. Through these interactions, Marcus realized the true impact of his actions extended far beyond that fateful night in Chicago. By the time Marcus completed his physical therapy, he was ready to embrace a new chapter in his life. While he still drove for Uber occasionally, he dedicated much of his time to public speaking and community service. He partnered with organizations focused on gun violence prevention, sharing his story to advocate for safer neighborhoods. He volunteered at youth centers, mentoring kids who reminded him of his younger self, kids who needed guidance and encouragement to believe in themselves. Marcus's journey wasn't without its challenges. There were days when the pain in his shoulder flared up, forcing him to slow down. Other times, memories of that night crept back, threatening to pull him into darkness. But Marcus refused to let those moments define him. Instead, he channeled his energy into helping others, finding solace in the knowledge that his actions had sparked positive change. Looking back, Marcus sometimes marveled at how one decision had transformed his life so completely. From a quiet Uber driver working tirelessly to provide for his family, he had become a beacon of hope for millions. Yet through it all, he remained humble, steadfast in his belief that true heroes aren't defined by grand gestures or titles. They're defined by the choices they make when it matters most. And for Marcus Davis, that choice had been clear: save the boy, no matter the cost. As Marcus Davis continued to heal, both physically and emotionally, he began to reflect more deeply on the events that had led him to that fateful night. The bullet wound in his shoulder was a constant reminder of the sacrifices he had made. But it wasn't just the physical scars that lingered. Memories of struggles from his past resurfaced, forcing him to confront parts of himself he had long tried to bury. Journalists and reporters, eager to dig deeper into his story, uncovered details about Marcus's life before the incident. They painted a picture of a man who had faced countless hardships yet never lost sight of his values. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood, Marcus grew up watching his parents work tirelessly to provide for their family. His father worked double shifts at a factory, while his mother juggled multiple part-time jobs. Despite their efforts, money was always tight, and Marcus learned early on the importance of hard work and perseverance. When Marcus graduated high school, he followed in his father's footsteps, landing a job at the same factory where his dad had spent decades. For years, it seemed like life was finally stable. He married young, had 2 beautiful children, Ava and Liam, and settled into a routine that, while not glamorous, brought him contentment. But then came the layoffs, a result of automation replacing human workers. Suddenly, Marcus found himself unemployed, struggling to support his growing family. The months that followed were some of the darkest in Marcus's life. Bills piled up and the stress strained his marriage. Eventually, his wife left, leaving him as a single father. It was a blow Marcus hadn't anticipated, but he refused to let it break him. Instead, he poured all his energy into raising his kids, teaching them the same lessons his parents had instilled in him: resilience, kindness, and the value of doing what's right, even when it's hard. To make ends meet, Marcus turned to driving for Uber. It wasn't the career he had envisioned for himself, but it allowed him flexibility to care for his children. Every day he reminded himself that success wasn't measured by wealth or status. It was measured by the love and effort you put into your responsibilities. And so he drove through Chicago's streets, picking up passengers and listening to their stories, finding solace in the anonymity of his job. Now, as reporters shared these pieces of his history with the world, people began to see Marcus, not just as a hero, but as a relatable figure, a man who had endured loss, uncertainty, and hardship, yet still chose to act selflessly. His background made his bravery seem even more extraordinary. For many, Marcus became a symbol of hope, proof that ordinary people could rise above adversity and make a difference. But for Marcus, revisiting his past stirred mixed emotions. On one hand, he felt pride in how far he'd come despite the challenges. On the other, he couldn't shake the guilt of not being able to give his own kids the life he wanted for them. He often wondered if Ava and Liam resented him for the sacrifices they'd had to make, the canceled vacations, the second-hand clothes, the nights spent eating ramen noodles because there wasn't enough money for groceries. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Marcus sat alone in his living room, staring at the wall. The weight of everything, the shooting, the media attention, the praise, felt overwhelming. He thought about the little boy he had saved, Ethan, and imagined what life might have been like for him if things had gone differently that night. Then he thought about his own children asleep in the next room and realized something important. His actions weren't just about saving Ethan. They were also about showing Ava and Liam the kind of person he hoped they would grow up to be. Determined to turn his second chance at life into something meaningful, Marcus decided to dedicate himself to inspiring others. With the help of mentors and supporters, he launched a series of motivational talks aimed at empowering people to overcome adversity and embrace courage in everyday situations. His presentations were raw, honest, and deeply personal. He spoke openly about his struggles, losing his job, becoming a single father, and facing moments of doubt, but he also emphasized the importance of perseverance and compassion. "I'm not special," Marcus often said during his speeches. "I'm just a regular guy who did what I thought was right. If I can inspire even one person to believe in themselves and their ability to make a difference, then my pain was worth it." His words resonated with audiences of all ages and backgrounds. Teachers invited him to speak at schools, where students listened intently as he shared stories of overcoming obstacles. Community leaders asked him to address local organizations, encouraging members to find strength in unity. Even corporations hired him to deliver keynote speeches at conferences, hoping his message would motivate employees to approach challenges with renewed determination. One of Marcus's most impactful appearances was at a youth center in a low-income neighborhood. As he stood before a group of teenagers, many of whom had grown up facing similar hardships to his own, he spoke candidly about the choices they would face in life. "You'll have moments when you're scared, unsure, maybe even ready to give up," he told them. "But remember this. Every choice you make shapes the person you become. Be brave, be kind, and never underestimate the power of doing the right thing, no matter how small it may seem." Afterwards, several teens approached him, sharing their own struggles and thanking him for giving them hope. One girl, barely 16, handed him a note that read, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone. You've inspired me to keep going even when it feels impossible." Holding the note, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude, not for the recognition, but for the opportunity to help someone else feel seen and valued. Meanwhile, Ethan, the boy Marcus had saved, remained a steadfast presence in his life. The two developed a bond that neither of them had expected. Ethan's parents frequently invited Marcus to family gatherings, treating him like an honorary uncle. Watching Ethan laugh and play, completely unaware of the danger he had once faced, filled Marcus with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he needed. Yet despite the joy these connections brought, Marcus couldn't ignore the lingering questions about his future. What would happen when the media attention faded? When people stopped recognizing him on the street or inviting him to speak? Would he return to the quiet, unremarkable life he had led before? The answer came to him gradually as he continued to engage with communities and individuals touched by his story. Marcus realized that true fulfillment didn't come from fame or recognition. It came from making a lasting impact. Whether it was mentoring a teenager, comforting a grieving parent, or simply offering a kind word to someone in need, every act of kindness mattered. And Marcus knew he had the power to keep creating those moments long after the headlines disappeared. By the time winter rolled around, Marcus's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. He had gone from being an anonymous Uber driver to a celebrated figure whose story inspired millions. Yet at his core, he remained the same humble, hard-working man who believed in the goodness of humanity. He carried the lessons of his past with him, using them to guide his decisions and shape his future. As he prepared for another speaking engagement, Marcus glanced at a framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of him, Ethan, and Ethan's parents, taken during one of their visits. Smiling faces stared back at him, a testament to the lives intertwined because of one split-second decision. In that moment, Marcus knew he had found his purpose, not in seeking glory but in serving others. And so Marcus Davis stepped forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Not as a hero defined by a single act of bravery, but as a man committed to building a brighter future for himself, for his children, and for everyone whose path he crossed along the way. Years passed, and Marcus Davis's story continued to inspire millions. What started as a quiet evening in Chicago had transformed into a defining moment, not just for Marcus, but for the countless lives he touched. His name became synonymous with courage and selflessness, a reminder that even in the darkest times, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary acts. Marcus's journey wasn't without its challenges. The physical scars from the bullet wound remained a permanent part of him, a constant reminder of the night he risked everything. On cold days, his shoulder ached, and there were moments when simple tasks, like lifting groceries or playing catch with his kids, felt impossible. But Marcus refused to let these limitations define him. Instead, he embraced them as proof of his resilience, using them to fuel his mission of inspiring others. His speaking career flourished. Marcus traveled across the country, sharing his story with audiences ranging from school children to corporate executives. Each speech was different, tailored to the unique needs of the listeners, but the core message remained the same. We all have the power to make a difference. It doesn't take grand gestures. Sometimes it's the small choices we make every day that matter most. One of his most memorable appearances was at a national conference on gun violence prevention. Standing on stage, Marcus looked out at a sea of faces: survivors, activists, lawmakers, and families who had lost loved ones to senseless violence. He took a deep breath before beginning, his voice steady despite the weight of the topic. "I didn't set out to be a hero," he began. "I was just a guy trying to get through another day. But when I saw that little boy standing there, frozen in fear, I knew I couldn't stand by and do nothing. That decision changed my life. And not just mine. It changed the lives of Ethan, his family, and everyone who heard about what happened that night." As Marcus spoke, he shared not only the triumphs but also the struggles, the sleepless nights, the guilt, the doubts. He admitted that there were days when he questioned whether he'd made the right choice. "But then I think about Ethan," he said, his voice softening, "and I know it was worth it. Every sacrifice, every ounce of pain, it was worth it because he's still here living his life, dreaming his dreams." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Strangers approached him afterward, tears streaming down their faces, thanking him for giving them hope. Some shared their own stories of loss and survival, while others promised to carry his message forward. For Marcus, these interactions were the most rewarding part of his work. They reminded him that his actions had sparked a ripple effect, inspiring others to act with kindness and bravery in their own lives. Back home, Marcus's children, Ava and Liam, grew up watching their father become a role model for communities, nationwide. At first, they struggled to understand why strangers treated their dad like a celebrity. "Why does everyone want to take pictures with you?" Ava once asked, tilting her head curiously. Marcus chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Because sometimes, people need to see that good things can happen, even when life feels hard." Over time, Ava and Liam came to appreciate the impact their father had made. They saw how his speeches encouraged bullied kids to stand tall, how his advocacy gave a voice to those affected by gun violence, and how his humility inspired others to lead with compassion. They took pride in being his children, often introducing him proudly to their friends. "This is my dad," Ava would say, beaming. "He saved a kid's life." Ethan, now a teenager, remained a close friend of the family. The bond between him and Marcus only grew stronger with time. Whenever Ethan achieved something, a good grade, a spot on the soccer team, or simply overcoming a personal challenge, he called Marcus to share the news. "You're the reason I'm here," Ethan often said. "I wouldn't be doing any of this if it weren't for you." For Marcus, hearing those words filled him with a profound sense of purpose. Saving Ethan wasn't just about protecting one child. It was about creating a ripple effect of positivity. Ethan's success became a testament to the idea that every life saved has the potential to touch countless others. Despite his fame, Marcus never lost sight of who he was: a devoted father, a compassionate friend, and a man committed to making the world a better place. He continued driving for Uber occasionally, finding joy in connecting with passengers and hearing their stories. To him, those rides were a grounding reminder of the everyday struggles people faced, far removed from the spotlight. As the years went by, Marcus's legacy expanded beyond speeches and interviews. Books were written about him, documentaries aired on major networks, and murals of his likeness appeared in cities nationwide. Schools named scholarships after him, honoring students who demonstrated exceptional courage and kindness. Community centers launched programs inspired by his message, teaching young people the importance of standing up for what's right. Yet, none of this changed Marcus at his core. He remained humble, always quick to deflect praise onto others. "I'm not the hero," he would say during interviews. "The real heroes are the teachers, the nurses, the parents, all the people working behind the scenes to make the world better. I'm just lucky enough to have been noticed." In one of his final public appearances, Marcus addressed a packed auditorium, delivering a speech that would later be quoted in classrooms and boardrooms around the world. "Courage isn't about being fearless," he told the crowd. "It's about feeling afraid and choosing to act anyway. It's about looking at the world and seeing not just problems but possibilities. We all have the power to change someone's life, whether it's through big acts or small gestures. Don't wait for the perfect moment. It might never come. Do what you can, when you can, because you never know the difference it might make." As the audience erupted into applause, Marcus glanced at Ethan, sitting in the front row with a wide grin. In that moment, Marcus knew his sacrifice had been worth it. Not because of the accolades, but because he'd helped shape a brighter future for someone who mattered. Looking back on his life, Marcus realized that true heroes aren't defined by capes or titles. They're defined by the choices they make when it matters most. And for Marcus Davis, that choice had been clear: save the boy, no matter the cost. Through his bravery, Marcus had proven that even in a world often overshadowed by fear and division, there is still room for hope, for kindness, and for courage. He had become more than just an Uber driver or a survivor. He had become a beacon of light, guiding others toward a better tomorrow. And so Marcus Davis's story lived on, not as a tale of one man's heroism, but as a reminder that within each of us lies the power to create change, one courageous act at a time.